So I remember coming, I guess, in 2018, right?
Yeah.
To work for you at the Claremont Institute as Vice President of Education, and in being excited about it because I didn't really want to go back to a think tank, but the way you described it, what you were doing was appealing, let's say.
Yeah.
And I remember coming in and you said something like "Welcome to the Revolution," and shook my hand, and it was fast movement ever after.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we need to explain to a lot of people out there is why, because the rest of the institutional right was basically anti-Trump,
Yeah.
or they had very deep suspicions. Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting question here as to why Claremont, which is in a way like not involved in policy, right? It's more teaching. It's not. It wasn't in D.C. at the time, and so what makes Claremont so special that somehow these egghead scholars, right, that we I guess we are to some degree, and we all study with, understood MAGA from the beginning.
It was two things. We were out in California, so we had seen America's blue future, and it was grim. And so we had a more acute sense of the crisis on our hands. We'd also been studying for a long time and writing about basically 100 years of progressivism, the colonization of national government by the bureaucracy, the increasingly tenuous connection between the people, their representatives, and what government did every day. Mm-hmm. And Trump seemed to understand that instinctually. He thought it was crazy. He wanted to, in a way, get back to an older way of politics, a more political way of politics, if I can put it that way. And scholars, friends of ours like John Marini, have been writing about this for years. You needed someone who was completely outside that system, who could tap into this discontent with the American people and run with it. Also, we a lot of our friends, I know like a bunch of lawyer friends who are cruise people in Newport Beach, they thought, he's just going to betray us. The judges will be bad. He's just going to, he's conning us. And my point always to them in private was, happy to be vindicated, was, look, I mean, this is politics. I mean, he's gonna dance with the girl that brought him.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you guys talking about? So understanding the possible revolutionary quality in the good sense of Trump and the movement he represented, in a way, a kind of second Reagan revolution, which Reagan admitted was a failure in his farewell address. He didn't quite do what he came to do. Mm-hmm. And I think Trump picked that mantle back up in different ways because it was 30 years later, but that's what we saw in Trump.
Is it fair to say that part of what you're talking about is the fact that because Claremont had such a deep study, right, going on for decades of American political thought and what had happened with 100 years of progressive era, that the Claremont scholars and associated, fellows who were out there doing things, but educated by Claremont, they just had a stronger sense. And in a way, Glenn Beck picked this up, right?
Sure.
When he talked about Woodrow Wilson, R.J. Pestrito, another Claremont-associated fellow, his book about progressivism, was it 10 plus years ago, 15 years ago. The fact that from Woodrow Wilson and even before him on, you have this 100-year thing going on where there's basically a decline or corruption. So the Claremont case was an understanding that we are really in a bad state, or the Constitution's been beaten, out of form.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you think that's true? And that enabled then the understanding that actually Trump may be Godzilla in Washington, D.C., but when there's these other monsters to fight, Godzilla may be exactly what we need.
Yeah, and also the sense in which Republicans had been fighting an asymmetric war, not in their favor for a long time, because the disproportionate political disposition, to say the least, of the national bureaucratic and NGO establishment was 80-90% Democrat. So when Democrats came into the presidency, they were pushing on open doors. When Republicans came in, take your pick and take your pick of your scandal. Nixon, Reagan, Bush. I mean, they basically, the modern progressive Democrats, and that would include, I think, the mainstream Democrats on the left, basically thought that every president since Richard Nixon, Republican, was illegitimate, in some sense or fashion. So it was nothing new for us to have them say that about Trump.
Right. Well, okay, so let's go back to then taking on the presidency then. I mean, what were your thoughts coming into that role and looking at the scene when you did have a lot of contention about Trump, and Claremont was clearly navigating in the direction of, no, there's something real here, and this is someone who is moving in the right direction?
Yeah, it was, well, first of all, it's to maintain, one of the challenges to maintain our feet firmly planted in our roots, that is to say, our teaching and scholarly project. But at the same time to realize, and the DC Center is a good example of this, we needed to be more overtly political in the best sense of that term. So navigating that while taking fire from the more establishment right and never Trump right, while also trying to fend off the left, who considered Trump back then, and really even, they basically considered Claremont this way. Going back to the Reagan administration, it's just our profile had grown much more prominent nationally. They think the whole project is illegitimate. It's somehow crypto authoritarianism or illiberalism or anything like that. So doing our best to present public arguments that no, actually this is quite American. It's just we've been warped for 100 years with a different sort of anti-constitutional way of doing government. So, striking that balance between a think tank that does scholarly work and teaching, while also acknowledging, especially to potential supporters, that we're not all just in the classroom all day.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And even at the time, there were Claremont people within that first Trump administration, notably friend and colleague Mike Lanton, who had written the Flight 93 essay. That I remember when I read that, I thought, I didn't even know him at the time at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you and others did, but I remember reading this, and it made the argument pro-Trump in such a strong way. Rush Limbaugh read it for his entire show on air. I read it, and I was thinking, who is this guy? I want to meet him because I agree with this.
Yeah.
And that was, that was just one sign that many of these people would end up within the administration, which they did. But outside the administration, in a Trump 1.0 world, right? There were a couple stands that really stick out in my mind that you made, that Claremont made, that we were all part of, that were bold at the time, and now everybody knows it was true.
Yeah.
And one of them is that signature essay you put out about defeating multiculturalism or identity politics and wokeism, and how this was a regime-level threat, which of course at the time was supposedly crazy talk.
Yeah.
And I feel like now everyone acknowledges it, and it's part of Trump 2.0's agenda, right, throughout the administration.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about putting up planting that flag back in 2019.
Yeah, it's always been our view that the best trajectory for America would be to get back to the Declaration of Independence, which
shocking.
Shocking, which means, we're all free and equal in a way, equal in our rights. But the diversity of people and men means that to demand equal outcomes for every group based on their race or sexual identity is madness and can only be achieved through totalitarianism. And so the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which had the noble purpose of overturning Jim Crow, as it should have, quickly got colonized by the bureaucracy, or appropriated by the bureaucracy and the courts and the movement on the left, and quickly turned into this kind of new racial balancing system. Where you would, basically based on your skin color or identity, you would get certain benefits or get certain demerits. And we thought that's no way to run a republic. It will only lead to civic strife and dissolution. So the stand-in word for all of that would be multiculturalism, which is to say all cultures it's sort of a weird mix of left-wing ideology and cultural relativism, although they certainly have their view of justice, so it's not really relativistic. But the idea that America is merely an amalgamation of different identity groups, that the government gets to manage and manage who gets what and why based on those identity groups, seemed like the most un-American thing we'd ever heard of, and precisely the thing we tried to get away from over the course from the Civil War up until the 60s. Unfortunately, it turned in a bad direction. So a lot of the current war on woke, I think, has that as its background, or that the revulsion of that type of way of doing government.
Isn't it wild how, I remember, this coming out and, everyone working together during this time. And I remember how edgy that was. And now it seems, Chris Rufo's on Twitter every day saying this is what we're going to do to these woke universities. Oh, look, Harvard doesn't want to accept the Civil Rights Act, right? We do have to step back. I hope you step back and think, there should be something gratifying about how that stand and that effort has turned into success really all over the place, because part of the point in your essay was we need to recognize this as a regime-level threat,
right?
As you were just explaining, to the very existence of the United States of America, to the very principles of its founding. And people said, that's crazy.
And
now it does feel like this is a win, right?
Yeah. Well, we've been long students of progressivism, as we've talked about. But the latest iteration of it, especially after the 60s, was this new kind of racialized identity stuff. And we also had been observing in the 90s and the 2000s the insanity on campus at the studies departments. And that all spilled over into national politics right about when we wrote that essay. So now it's sort of, at the time, I think a naive reader of that would have thought, what, multiculturalism, but I like the Mexican food truck. Like, what's your problem? Why are you guys hating? But yeah, our point was it's a different way of life. It's a different way of thinking about justice, and it's not going to end well for America. So we need to start going after it.
Yeah, this isn't about food.
No, it's not.
This is about how we conceive of ourselves as citizens.
Yeah.
So another stance at that time that was, I think, striking, controversial is, and I'll never forget this, I'm very proud to have been there during this time, was when the riots were happening, the COVID lockdowns were going on. It really felt like the country was falling apart. And I remember every day thinking to myself, do never forget this. And what I don't want to forget ever is the fact that no one was standing up and saying, this is absolute bullshit. Like, this is evil, it needs to stop.
Yeah.
Very few people did. And Claremont, of course, did.
Yeah, I mean, some people said rioting's bad, but that's about as far as they got. But my chairman, Tom Klingenstein, and I decided to publish a punchy op-ed in the American Mind called "America is Not Racist," basically showing people the deep principles behind the American regime, and the fact that to call this a systemically racist society was crazy. And to burn down our cities and to reorient all of national government because of this one case of George Floyd was equally crazy and was revolutionary. I mean, we had to understand it for what it was, which was a fundamental attempt to reorder and basically deconstruct the American Constitution with a lot of baggage before it, of course, over many decades in different organizations and the civil rights movement or certain radical aspects of it. But this was taken up as a huge opportunity for the enemies of America. And then plenty of normal people were just caught up in it and thought, racism is bad, I want to stand against it. But we want to try to explain this whole architecture and that the real ideological drivers behind it, the activists, were not just standing up for black rights. They really wanted to reorder the country.
This, I mean, I can't help but say it again. The fact that we published you saying and Tom saying America is not racist as the title in the middle of that noise
in May.
I mean, that was right in the middle. Very few people were saying anything. They were terrified. That always stood out to me as just full confidence. This is the right thing. And history has vindicated that, I think, as well.
Mitt Romney was marching with Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Right?
Oh yeah. Don't I remember it? I can see the video now. I don't want to. I want to black it out of my mind. So you have this this really rebellion or revolution taking place in the streets. You have brown shirts marching. The left was really on the march, literally burning down police stations, defacing statues, and this all led into what Anton called the coming coup. Michael Anton in his piece in American Mind leading into that election in 2020. And of course, the results of that election were very controversial. Claremont, Claremont, just a little bit. This really was at the ripping America apart at that time, and we sort of predicted it, right? Claremont predicted this. You were warning about what might happen, and what happened was in fact messy, right? And then you have Claremont scholars like John Eastman advising the president as well. Difference of opinions at Claremont about 2020, I'm sure, but this was something that was like the next big drama, was this heartrending and divisive 2020 result.
Yeah. I mean, what we predicted, which sort of didn't quite come to pass, but it seemed to us all the indicators were in place that if that election had gone 3 points the other way and Trump had won a squeaker, the left was not going to let him take office, or they were going to do whatever they could to not let him take office. The opposite happened, and it's not fair to say the right didn't let Biden take office. There was kind of a bit of a riot on January 6th. It certainly wasn't an insurrection. But we saw what the left was planning in a very organized way. Unlike January 6th, was sort of all levels of the Democratic apparatus, from the nonprofits and the big money all the way down. They wanted to, they were fixing to make a color revolution if they had to. Now it's Biden won a squeaker, and they didn't have to. And we were pilloried for that prediction, but it seemed clear as day to us. And then, as you mentioned, my colleague John Eastman, in his sort of personal capacity as an attorney, became one of Trump's legal advisors in November, and then, of course, wrote his infamous memo in early January about Trump's options and Mike Pence's options and all that. And John has now been really outrageously and egregiously railroaded. I mean, he spent $1 million on legal defenses. California is on the final stage of trying to disbar him for merely advocating for a client, even if that client is, a controversial president. So that it really seems like 10 years ago, doesn't it? It was only 4 years ago, which is wild. Now, luckily, some of the tide's turning on the lawfare, of course, with Trump trying to do a lot about it. But John's still out there fighting for his legal life, and it's his treatment has been profoundly un-American, and I think is a testament to some of the stakes we've been writing about for a long time, and the asymmetric quality of right-on-left warfare, political warfare, I should say. Yeah.
No, it really is. I mean, it's insane. He's in trouble, $1 million in legal fees, his entire career. That they've tried to destroy and certainly have derailed in many ways, all because he wrote things that Harvard professors on the other side were willing to support and push if the election had gone the other way.
And that Congress agrees with now because they revised the Electoral Count Act.
Yes, exactly. Yes, in fact, I had a conversation once, happened to have a conversation with President Trump about that, and he was saying he was right. He was right. See what they did. They had to change the law. Trump understands that.
Yeah.